Here's John McCain, U.S. Senator and 2008 presidential candidate, as well as a war hero from the Vietnam War in the 1960s. And now, as he is nearing his 82nd birthday, the situation is very dire. He's very sick with cancer. And astrology can be very illustrative in cases like this, although I don't want to frighten you, of course, because it doesn't mean that the various aspects I'm about to describe necessarily mean that you would be dying of a disease. However, we all have to die of something at some time, and once you reach your 80s, then it's entirely possible that difficult aspects could correlate with such things. And we see that in his chart, in his birth chart, he has the moon in Aquarius, Mars in Leo, Uranus in Taurus. Particularly Uranus in Taurus square the Mars is a definite health indicator, but the moon is in there as well because it's in the 12th sign with the Uranus squaring. And we see, in fact, that Uranus is currently transiting in the very degrees that square that moon, as we have now learned that he is finally stopping cancer treatment because I think they've pretty much lost hope that there'll be any kind of recovery. And we also notice that Saturn is directly square Mercury in the 8th house, which is a very difficult aspect, the 8th house being the death house. Saturn, in fact, was back in Sagittarius around the 23rd degree when he was initially diagnosed in the summer of 2017. To that we can add Neptune in opposition to itself, and this gives you a series of transits that are definitely indicative of what is happening. And if we turn to the progressions, we see that Mars, which comes from the health house, has reached the degree of Mercury in the 8th house. That's a very dangerous indicator, again, because it's the 8th house of death, and Mars is a health planet. And we also notice that the progressed moon is nearing its own position at birth, which is a very tricky position. So this adds to the indications. And then Venus has been very recently squaring the Mercury, which again doesn't help. And we see the progressed ascendant very close to squaring the Sun. So there's quite a bit of activity in the progressed chart that points to a very difficult situation. And then if we turn to solar arcs, we see that we have Mars, and we have Neptune, Jupiter, and Uranus sending strong signals. And keep in mind, solar arcs, everything moves at the same speed via the arc of the Sun. So the same aspects that are there at birth are simply shown in a different part of the chart. And so you see that Uranus has just entered the 6th sign, and this is quite a negative indicator. It continues to show the square to Mars, which is now up here in Scorpio. And the fact that Uranus has just entered the sign of Leo in the last half year or so is a clear indicator of what is going on. And we see Neptune has been, again, in the last half year, squaring the Sun. That's another indication of very tricky conditions. And it's interesting to see that Jupiter, which normally on the ascendant might be considered a very positive thing, but in the context of everything that is going on, it's not all that helpful, particularly in light of the fact that it opposes the Sun. And at birth, while it's a very powerful career planet, and John McCain has had a tremendous career with great influence, nevertheless, it is in square to his Virgo planets, and so it's not always necessarily going to deliver the best of news. This chart is also very interesting in that McCain endured a long prison stay in Vietnam, when he courageously opted to stay in prison, even though he was given the chance to leave because his father had influence, but he elected to stay. And he spent the years from 1967 to 1973 imprisoned. And at the time, transiting Uranus and Pluto were going through the degrees of his Venus, and then Uranus drifted into Libra. All of this is very difficult because the Libra is a very difficult house. But the fact that it was happening over Venus by Uranus is very indicative, because Uranus co-rules the 12th sign, which is the sign of prisons. Moreover, you also can see that Uranus at birth was squaring the moon, and so there is some sense that this could happen to him, given that it's a pattern that is there in the natal chart, T-square Uranus, Moon, Mars, in particular the Uranus Moon, however. And then the fact that Saturn, which is the main ruler of the 12th house, is in the first house opposite Venus and Neptune. So that's a double indication that the 12th sign might become a real issue for him. McCain, to my mind, is a very honorable man who has had an amazing career and has been very influential in U.S. politics. And it is definitely a very sad moment in American history to see this war hero at what appears to be near the end of his life.